I think we're in the heyday of bass making of all time.
When you're buying an old bass, not only are you buying that bass, but you're also buying all the repair work that bass has inside of it that you probably don't know about yet.
I hear the same stories again and again. Oh yeah, I've heard that one before. I lean the bass up in the corner of the grand piano in the case, and the cat runs up it and launches off. I actually heard that 3 times so far.
As you can tell from that opener, this is not a typical episode for the podcast. I'm Jason Heath. This is Contrabass Conversations, and we are chatting today with 22 of the world's great bass luthiers, and actually more than 22 when you count Arnold Schnitzer, who you're going to be hearing from, David Gage, who you're going to be hearing from, VandeKopple, who organizes this event and also a master luthier. This event that I was at, that we're chatting live at, was the Violin Society of America, the VSA Double Bass Workshop. And it takes place at Oberlin every other year. The year that the ISB Bass Convention isn't happening, that's when this takes place. And some of these luthiers have been coming for years and years. They get together, they share openly what they've learned, what they're working on, their new discoveries. It's just the most fantastic type of learning environment. I just wish that everybody in every discipline would do something like this. So cool. Thank you so much to Mitch Moehring for inviting me, and we'll be doing introductions in this. It's a super fun episode. I do want to give a quick shout out to the people that make it possible for me to travel to these events, and these are the sponsors for the podcast. They are D'Addario Strings, Robertson & Sons, A440, and Upton Bass. That's all I'm doing today in terms of sponsors. I just want to acknowledge that these are the people that make it possible for me to travel to events like this, and I had such a great time doing this. Hope that this is the first of many. So enjoy this great chat with some of the world's best double bass luthiers. I emailed out to bass players and I put out on social media, I'm going to talk with all these luthiers. What do you want to know? And I have way too many questions to cover. But I thought maybe we could start with, actually, let's do this. Let's go around and just say who, because people aren't going to see this. Let's just go around and give a quick introduction, if you don't mind.
Hey, I'm Jeff Mueller, a longtime lurker, first-time builder. Here to learn. This is a wonderful source of knowledge for me, and I'm sharing whatever I can, but just taking it in.
Gabriel Golden, here from Los Angeles, Los Angeles Bassworks, repairer, restorer.
Mitch Moehring Strings, bass maker, repairer.
Joey Naeger, Houston, Texas, Leue Violin Shop, maker, fixer, unbreaker.
Brian Gencarelli, Greenville, South Carolina.
My name is Ralph Alcala from Los Angeles, California. Have my little shop, bass maker, and repairer.
Jacob Bradford from Greenville, South Carolina.
Dustin Woodward from Golden, Colorado.
Hello, this is Vince Jesse from Madison, Wisconsin, with the Double Bass Workshop.
I'm Elinore Morris from Sweden. I have a repair workshop in Sweden.
Ray Ramirez from Puerto Rico, Macau, Puerto Rico. Bass maker, more in the electric upright bass, but also learning the craft of the upright, the double bass.
Robbie McIntosh from Cambridge, New York, bass maker, bass restorer, bass repairman.
David Gage out of New York City. I'm here to learn and share and excited about it. And we're going to have a great week.
Hi, I'm Andrew Stolfa from Houston, Texas. I work at Quantum Bass Center, repairing and restoring basses. Someday I'll build a bass. That's what I'm here to learn about.
Andrew Hassel, Chicago Bass Works, making, restoring, and repairs and setup.
Randy Hunt from Nashville, Tennessee, Hunt Double Bass, repair, setup, and finishing my first double bass.
Arnold Schnitzer, currently Las Cruces, New Mexico. I read somewhere that I'm a world-renowned luthier.
Mark Leue, have a father-daughter bass business in the Pioneer Valley, Ashfield, Massachusetts.
And VandeKopple, I'm a luthier from northern New Jersey, and I'm trying to be the director of this and it works. Thanks.
Great. And since we got to Jay here at the end, maybe a good place to start at Jay or Arnold or David or anyone else, feel free to chime in. Maybe what is this thing we're at, and what inspires all these people from around the world to come and learn? Just tell us about this event.
Well, the VSA a number of years ago had looked at what was available for luthiers for violin initially. Negreros was there at the time, and they said, well, what we really need is a forum for all these top makers to get together. And never had happened before, but violin makers have secrets, and they said, well, that doesn't happen here. Everybody learns and everybody shares, And so they started this back in the 80s, and eventually it got to the point where they said, well, why don't we have a bass workshop? So this is the VSA Oberlin Bass Workshop, and basically we invite people. It's not a beginning class where you learn how to do stuff. It's a matter of all these folks are working either full-time or part-time in a shop, and it's just a great way to get together. With basses, bass luthiers, the problem is the violin makers often will have, if you need a tool, you call up the company and they'll send it out. You make your own as a bass luthier, and everybody comes up with a different idea, and we share those ideas, which is, I think, great. Thank you.
And then just briefly speaking about the beginner, this is not a place for people who are starting out, and nobody here is starting out, but there is now a bass workshop for people that are starting out, right? Aren't you starting something this year?
Up at UNH, they've had a program there for many years. Carl Roy, who was the head of the Mittenwald School of Violin Making, came to UNH. They started a program. We started violin making and then violin repair, violin setup, and this year they asked me to do a bass setup class. So the first time that we've been involved with that, and other than that, it's pretty much you find a shop who's with somebody who's nice enough and willing to show you some things, and that's the only real option otherwise.
So the people that are here, is this anybody's first time at this event? Okay, so we have 5 hands or so go up. Second time? Third? More than 3? Okay, wow. So anybody, but maybe those people that have been multiple times, why do you keep coming back? What do you learn? Taking time out of and leaving your shop and making the sacrifice to come out to an event like this, why do you keep coming back? And what's the experience been like?
This is Mitch Moehring. I keep coming back. Every time I come, I'm around people with different techniques. I think I have the way to do it. And then there's someone at the bench right next to me that, it's just a much higher level, or I'm using the wrong tool, or there's a better technique to using that tool. And it always propels my skills like immediately. The next week I go back to my shop and everything's at a much higher level.
Hey, Andrew Hassel. Kind of like you were saying earlier, there's not really a lot of places to learn how to do this. When I first started, all I had was basically the internet. I was like looking at who's doing what, and people a lot of times ask like, how did you get into this? And honestly, it was just a lot of research and networking and finding people who were willing to talk to me. So when I saw that this program existed and all these people that I was checking out on the internet were all going to be at one place for a week working on basses, I was like, that sounds amazing. And so it's just like the first time I came, the networking that happened and just being around excellent people makes you more excellent. So it's really inspiring to come and just be around people who are at their top of their game, really.
Ralph here. The reason I came back this year is the first time the amount of enthusiasm for all the teachers and everybody to share, not just learn, but to share ideas. Everybody wants to teach. Everyone wants to share how they can do something better and improve and just elevate our field, and that's pretty much the reason I come back.
Well, I've got a whole bunch of questions, and I thought it'll probably lead to some really interesting conversations. Maybe we can kick it off with a question from Steve Rodby, Pat Metheny Group, longtime bass, actually just moved to Seattle and is looking for luthier recommendations. So let's throw that out there. And Steve says he calls these obvious questions, but they're probably a good place to start. So maybe one thing Steve asks is, how is working on basses different than other string instruments? I like big questions.
Brian Gencarelli. Well, obviously the bass is so much bigger than the other string instruments. There is so much movement in the instrument with the seasons compared to violin, viola, cello. The techniques that we have to use and employ to stabilize flat backs through seasons, planing a fingerboard, just the sheer volume of the work that we have to accomplish is so much more difficult and challenging because of the scope of the work. Oh yeah, and the different playing styles and setups that we would have to do.
Ralph here. One big difference is the tools. The majority of the tools that we do or have, we have to make or have made for us. Like earlier in the week, somebody said, you know, for violin guys or cello guys, a lot of these tools you can just order from a catalog and it's in your house, you know, a couple weeks later. For us, we either have to make it or have someone make it for us, and you know that's a big obstacle for a lot of projects.
One big difference working on the smaller instruments versus the bigger instruments. With the smaller instruments, you can maneuver the instrument itself in whatever position or angle you need to work on it. So you see a lot of violin guys, they have the violin in one hand and their tool in the other hand. Bass, you can't do that. You have to move yourself around the instrument as much as you can. So you have to bring a lot more physicality to the job. So I think that's why you see a big divide in the types of luthiers.
Arnold here. There are lots of books and methods and materials for any budding violin maker or violin restorer to use as their guide. There is nothing reliable yet for bass. And so a bass luthier needs to be very creative, figuring out how to do things, how to make and how to restore and how to fix things. So it's a whole different ballgame.
You know, Arnold, you said something interesting when I talked to you that I thought about a lot. I said, it's some dumb question like, what's it like working with your hands all the time? And you said, it's not your hands, you're working with your mind. Which is a great line, by the way, I just thought I'd... Brian mentioned setup. And that's the second part of Steve Rodby's question is, well, first of all, what percentage of your work, roughly, anyone feel free to answer, is for classical players versus more non-classical players? And then what are some of the general differences you might do in terms of setup for primarily jazz, primarily arco?
Gabriel here from Los Angeles. I'd say at our shop, rough estimation, probably half and half, jazz and classical. And it varies from students all the way to professionals. The differences in setup mainly starts with the strings, I would say, and then whether or not you have a pickup on there. And then you can get into the intricacies of, you know, a flatter fingerboard. A fingerboard shape is probably pretty big topic. And I know you did a whole segment with Joey on that, so people should tune into that. But yeah, I would say strings, in our opinion, are probably the biggest. Also the action, but that's a very personal thing for each player. So,
is a good setup just a good setup, or is there? I mean, again,
well, every shop
I've heard that.
Every shop has kind of their own ideas, but I mean, we're all here at this workshop to share those ideas and learn from each other. But you know, I think a player knows when they play on a good setup, and we also know when we see one.
But even in the jazz players, you have the jazz players who like the low setup with a growl on the fingerboard, and then you have the folks who like the setup with the gut strings and set it up way high because I can really thump on that thing. So it depends even on the player, not just the type of music they play.
I remember talking to Joey. He had a good line about fingerboards being the interface between player and instrument. Am I getting that right? Is that your invention, or did you lift that from someone? Not to put you on the spot. I guess I am putting you on the spot.
I don't know if I invented that idea or if I just discovered it or observed that idea, but it's just the truth. That's where you're meeting the instrument. Kind of back to your original point of setting up for different players, I've found that a good standard setup will make most people happy. They may want different strings, they may want to bump the bridge a little higher, a little lower, but a good setup is a good setup in my opinion. And then for the picky people, you just give them what they want.
I'm in a small East Texas town, and it seems like everybody plays all styles. So I don't really have like a jazz setup or a classical setup. It's just a setup.
This is Ralph. The shop I came from, one of the best lines that my boss ever told me was, a good setup starts with a relationship with a bass player. is knowing your bass player, knowing, and it's an evolving thing. Seeing how they play, how they change through time, whether they had an injury one year, and they can't handle that high action or they can't do this. So your setup for that person evolves throughout the years. So it's just a lot of information you kind of have to memorize and keep track of.
As a non-luthier right here, what can play, and probably most people listening, not luthiers, what can we do to be more helpful in communicating what we really want?
I guess agreeing on vocabulary usage. Sometimes I think players and luthiers use, just different vocabulary. So we're shooting for different things. What they're trying to express isn't what we might be hearing.
What's an example of vocabulary you want to hear,
so
or that we're using badly?
Like the growl thing, they want to hear growl, and sometimes that comes out, and then other people might think of that as being like fingerboard buzz, and then just, I want my strings as low as possible, and just like, well, how low is as low as possible?
Joey here. One thing I've observed is that from the player perspective, the experience of playing an instrument encompasses the sound and the feel. And often when they're describing what they're wanting, they really can't differentiate from those two variables. They may say they don't like the way it sounds, but really they don't like the way it's responding, and it actually sounds fine, or vice versa. So that can be really difficult to work through for both parties in that situation. So just something to think about.
I find in a number of cases, particularly younger folks, even the student level, but even some professionals, they don't know what necessarily a good setup is. And they'll come in with something like, oh, I got a buzz on my fingerboard, not realizing it's more than that. It's just a matter of, if you want a good response, do something with the post. And it's not critical of other luthiers, because very often got set up in a violin shop, and they this is their axe, and this is how it behaves, and just a good setup does help a lot.
It's important that players know that there are no miracles. Your bass has a horrible wolf tone. Okay, we can ameliorate it a little bit. We can tone it down. We can't totally get rid of it. It's going to go somewhere else. You want low action on your fingerboard, but you want to play really aggressively and pluck hard. Well, that's not really going to work. So be realistic. Don't expect miracles, but we can probably compromise and make you reasonably happy.
Another question. This is from Lloyd Goldstein, who is a certified music practitioner. He plays for cancer patients down in Tampa, and it dovetails really nicely with something I was seeing earlier today. Here, his question is: many instruments are made out of high-quality European spruce and maple combinations. Some contemporary luthiers are using other woods that are perhaps more available or less expensive. Timely question, right? Are the sonic results supporting these choices in fine instruments? And Mark Kindig asked a similar question. How do you determine what's good wood for a bass? So anybody want to speak to wood choices? Arnold Schnitzer.
How many hours do we have?
30, slightly under 39.
That should do it. Well, the traditional woods are in short supply, and they're in short supply because of overforesting. They're in short supply because the Asian and Eastern European companies have bought up most of the world's fine tone woods, and no one's planting any tone wood plantations. We as bass players need to work more with what we have. We're tired of only getting the picked over stuff from Europe. And it's very important for us from both an ecological and from a financial standpoint, and tonally, to investigate other woods that are available. For example, walnuts, poplars, mahoganies. Now, these woods have been used for hundreds of years by Italian and Spanish luthiers with fantastic results. Now, the results are different than typical maple and European spruce. But they're often excellent. And I think most of the guys in this room have had some experience with alternative tone woods. I personally have used about 12 different types of woods in my instruments. Robbie's used quite a few, with excellent results if you have a good grasp of both the science and the intuition of building.
What are a few examples of those woods, maybe?
Robbie McIntosh here. Cottonwood is a good tone wood. elm, even though elm is now a disappearing species because of the Dutch elm disease. Black walnut, cherry, butternut, yellow birch, white pine instead of spruce. A lot of precedent for using white pine in the old Yankee basses. The different aspens, willow, they all work. They all have their different qualities, and you can combine the qualities of the different top woods with the qualities of the different backwoods and get a whole range of results.
Another question Lloyd Goldstein asked, but ties into that, is just approach. Oh, I'm sorry, not Lloyd. Mark Kindig. Just talk to us about seasoning wood. What's your approach for seasoning wood? Salt and pepper. Okay.
Just in general, base wood should be drier than the conditions in which the instrument's going to live before you build the instrument, and that will help to make it more stable. Robbie could talk for about an hour about that, but.
Another question asked multiple times, first of all by Grace Lewis, who says, first, say hi to Andrew Stolfa.
Hi, Grace. Love you.
So she asked, so curious how these craftsmen became involved in their field. And David Parrott also asked, how did you get into this? Were you always mechanically inclined? Again, we could take 6 hours or whatever to go through that. But if a couple people just want to maybe share their journey to where they're at.
Randy Hunt. I started as a bass player, went to college, and I had high school wood shop. I was more interested in that than math and all that stuff. Yeah. So I always just thought it'd be cool to build a bass someday, and bought that Harry Wake book on bass building and read through it and was just totally baffled. And then years later, I needed a job, and I got a job at Zeta, that place that made electric violins and upright basses in Oakland, California. And that kind of got me started on my journey. And then just, and then of course as bass players, oftentimes, especially years ago, 20 years ago, you had to work on your own bass because it's hard to find a bass luthier, The first time I set my sound post, I used a pair of scissors and a butter knife because I didn't have any tools and I had no one to set it for me.
So we don't encourage that. Okay.
Brian Gencarelli. I am still a current public school orchestra teacher, and one of the reasons I got started is because I had no budget for repairs in my school, and so kids would have broken instruments, we would have blown seams. And so I just got some high glue, some clamps, and started reading and researching, and then eventually found my way here. And this is definitely the career path that I want to be on. As Randy was saying, just to piggyback on that, the world that the bassist in the 18 to 25-year-old guys, Randy and I are in our mid-40s, and especially me being from the South, to get to a bass luthier meant driving 12 hours, or to get to a luthier in general, maybe even a violin maker or something like that, could be a long distance. So it was really necessity to learn some basic setup things and start doing that. There's so much more opportunity for good work to be done in most areas of the country, and a lot because of programs like this.
This is Ralph. I actually, very similar to Brian, but on the other end, 8th grade, my middle school teacher in the inner city LA, no budget for repairs, did a lot of that stuff for herself, and I was that kid that just hung out in the orchestra room a little too much and just asked a lot of questions to the point where she just said, you know what, screw it, you do it. And every time a seam would pop or a crack, and she'd say, well, here, figure it out. I'll guide you as much as I can, but I did a lot of seam repairs for several years until I got to high school and found a violin maker that helped me just learn a little bit more as I progressed.
Robbie McIntosh here. I was a cabinet maker for 20 years before I started working on basses. It was when my daughter, who was 14 at the time, wished she could play the bass. And I couldn't afford one, so a friend of ours gave us one that was just a wreck. And with the generous help of violin maker friend Jeffrey Ovington and Lou DeLeon down in Orange, Connecticut, that's how I got started in the trade. And I think we all owe a debt of gratitude to Lou DeLeon, because he taught Arnold and David Gage and myself and several other guys. And his generosity was just unbelievable. And I consider my presence here, in addition to being rewarding, because everybody who's here brings something to it. That everybody has something unique that they bring to this sharing experience. But I feel obliged to kind of repay Lou by being here and sharing what I know.
I got another question. This is from Kristin Zoernig, who is a wonderful Baroque primarily player in the Bay Area. She plays in Philharmonia Baroque and all sorts of I'll read her question, her full question, because it's really well written. But the short question is removal necks and trends you're seeing. But she says, when you speak to the luthiers, I'd be interested to hear how they feel about the new removable neck trend and their different theories about how it's best accomplished. Also, curious about their thoughts on how it affects the sound, vibration, response, and then how do you feel about quote-unquote ravaging the fine instruments to do this?
I shipped a bass to New Mexico on Thursday, and when it arrived, it had a removable neck. So that's Brian, by the way. And this is why I think removable necks are really great for traveling. I mean, if you're primarily a player who stays in one place, maybe it's not necessary. But for someone who's going to be on a flight, I would highly recommend it.
This new trend of removable necks started approximately 200 years ago.
Really?
Yeah, there are pictures in the, what are those little books?
Elgar.
The Elgar books. There are pictures of 200-year-old basses with removable necks so they could travel on stagecoaches or whatever.
There's nothing new under the sun.
and in my opinion, having done a whole bunch of them, I was skeptical at first. I don't hear a tonal difference.
One of the basses in the Elgar book, it's a cornerless bass, was originally made with a removable neck. It's a big dovetail, and then he had it restored and had that taken out. And ironically, he's having me make a copy of that bass with a removable neck.
Another question Kristin had is about end pins, adjustable metal end pin versus wooden end pin, tonal differences, or other materials that I know are being used. Thoughts on the subject, observations? Oh, here we go.
Gabriel here. Well, let's see. I think it's so specific to each player and what they're playing and where they're playing. But yeah, I did. I guess this was 2 workshops ago. Yeah, 4 years ago. Did an experiment with a luthier who's no longer, isn't here this year. Didn't come out right.
He caught that.
John Hay, I think, out of Michigan, and he made 20-something different end pin rods out of 20-something different species of wood. And we basically cranked through all of them throughout a couple days, pitzing it and bowing it and recording it. And there's definitely a difference between all the different woods. There's a difference between wood, there's a difference between carbon fiber, there's a difference with steel. No bass. I'm of the opinion, and I think our shop is of the opinion, that no bass can you have a perfect formula for what will work for for all the basses. Each bass is going to be different, which I know is extremely frustrating, but that's what we deal with. So, yeah.
So no broad trends like, wow, it's different, but...
I see a bit of a trend, I think, at least in Los Angeles, of people going more toward, or starting to maybe shift a little bit towards wooden end pins. A lot of people, not a lot, but I'd say a lot of people are going towards the Labrie, and then they have kind of wooden pegs made. Certainly the carbon fiber is seeming to replace a lot of the steel, because I think that's for shipping. It lightens the bass. Also, the tonal differences with carbon fiber, I think the weight properties and maybe the resonance can somewhat simulate wood versus steel, but I can't say that there's one general thing that'll cure your woes.
Cellists geek out about their end pins too, don't they? Don't they use different, because the length, doesn't that have a pretty significant acoustical effect?
Yeah, and bassists, you see all different lengths. And what can be crazy with the bass is when you get it really, really far out, it can vibrate like mad. And I think the main thing is that you have a really well-made end pin that's not going to collapse on you and not going to break, because that can ruin your whole gig. So,
Well-fitted.
what's that?
Well-fitted.
A well-fitted end pin, yeah, that has a long enough screw and can interface with your wheel if you're using a wheel.
Sara Nelson, who's a bass teacher in, Andrew Hassel knows her, in the Chicago area. I know Sara too. Sara asks, what do you all wish bassists knew about caring for their instruments? What would you like to tell bassists? Oh, I see some passionate looks.
This is Jacob Bradford here. Clean your rosin off after the gig, please.
Oh, yes. That's all I was going to say too.
Jack Hill here. This is one of my pet peeves, and I'm always telling this to my students. Don't slide your bass on the floor. If you want to slide your bass on the floor, I can give you some sandpaper and it'll do the job a lot better.
In terms of cleaning off the rosin, anything will do? Can I just grab my kitchen towel? Anything better or worse?
I can't say one thing that would be better or worse, but Gabriel here. But 2 rags. 1 rag to wipe down your bass. Well, 1 rag first to wipe down your strings, and that only wipes your strings, and a separate rag to wipe the top of your bass. And they only get used for those 2 purposes. And wash them somewhat frequently, because otherwise they just build up and they're not cleaning.
Just touching on the strings, there are some strings that they stretch out enough to where a lot of sweat and hand oils get into the strings, and as soon as you take the tension off, you can literally see all that gunk squeeze out of the strings. And I'm not going to say the string brand, but it's a very common string, and people just don't take care of their strings. They die faster, they wear out faster, and if you don't wipe them down, you're wasting away a $300-$400 set of strings very quickly.
And just wiping them down with a cloth, not using rubbing alcohol, not boiling your strings, which I've heard is...
I don't recommend oiling your strings. Just every day after you play, just wipe it down. That's usually enough. And if you do that every day, you don't have to use alcohol. You don't have to really do that. So just or us, yeah.
I got one. This is Andrew. When you're first starting to learn how to drive, you're supposed to walk around your car and do like an inspection, make sure all the tires are inflated, there's nothing missing. And it's really helpful as a bassist to do that once a week. Just check your seams. Are there any new cracks that you didn't notice there before? Is your bridge looking like it's about to pop off? Because that's a really big thing. I take a lot of time to teach each of my customers how to relocate their bridge, where it should go, and I make them a little template even to help them do it themselves. But yeah, just doing a visual inspection, because sometimes if you let a seam that's on the treble side that you don't normally look at stay open for 6 months, it can become like a really expensive repair because the ribs start to warp, and it takes a lot of work to get that back into place.
This is Randy. Being from Nashville, if you're going to stand on your bass, just budget extra money for that each year.
Buy a humidity gauge for your room. They're cheap. They're like $10 on Amazon for an electronic one, and they tend to work really well. I have 4, 2 in the shop and 2 in the house, just to see the differences. They're cheap. They're easy to read. You know when it starts getting dry, and it helps you kind of predict if you're gonna pop a seam or a crack or something. Like it's not gonna blindside you.
Yeah, the other destroyer of bass besides low humidity, number 1, is gravity. There are really ways to avoid your bass falling over that help. I hear the same stories again and again. Oh yeah, I've heard that one before. I leaned the bass up in the corner of the grand piano in the case, and the cat runs up it and launches off. I actually heard that 3 times so far. They're just, you have to think about the height of the thing and the potential for gravity carnage. So,
And on the same subject, don't drive around in your car with the bass on its back, resting on the scroll. One bad pothole and you've got a broken neck.
The topic of humidity, I know, is a big topic. I moved to San Francisco, so I enjoy the humidity level very much. I don't know, gone are the winter post days, but I used to live in Chicago, and it's a different ballpark. Best practices, what should players be looking out for? What's a good range? Summer, winter, any thoughts or advice?
40% is pretty safe. Below 40, you're asking for trouble if it's a sustained amount of time. You'll see a lot of published figures of 50 or 60%, and that's very nice, but it's not really practical in a lot of places. So the great news is hygrometers are notoriously inaccurate. They drift, but they do have digital ones now with a recalibration knob, and you really only have to do it once at the beginning of the season. It's worth doing. They're inexpensive, and 40% is a pretty safe number.
In terms of keeping the room humid, a room humidifier, is that enough? Dampits or any device like that keeps the bass humid. I've heard it'll drip and open all sorts of things up. Experiences or thoughts on that?
Well, the issue I find with dampits is that you're really just humidifying just the inside of the instrument. You're not actually humidifying the whole instrument or even getting up to the neck or anything else like that. I mean, an instrument's always happiest in its case at night. But if you're leaving it out in the stand or in a room, just pick one room to be humidified and keep that as your humidification room. Keep all your instruments and everything else just in one room.
I recommend, this is Jack again, I recommend getting the biggest humidifier you can afford. Because if you get a small one, then you're not apt to keep it filled, and then you're just going to run into problems. I don't agree about dampits. I don't think they should be used at all. I usually find that they're used incorrectly, that they're over-soaked, stuck into the instrument where they drip into the bass and then cause warping of the wood, opening of seams that are very difficult to repair.
I've never met a bass luthier that doesn't prefer room humidification.
Okay.
We really don't like dampits. We see they drip down on the seams or down to the end block and cause their own damage.
So give a false sense of security.
Right. And the moment, the day you forget to wet the sponge might be the day that it drops below, and then it has the worst change in.
If your room is not huge, it's really not too hard to humidify the room. And Jack's point about a big one is less maintenance because people forget to do things. But in a if the room is not huge, it doesn't take a giant one.
But also, the dampit, the humidifiers, they don't last that long. I mean, maybe you'll be humid inside the bass for a few hours, but that's about the limit. I mean, we're talking about it needs it for a longer term than that.
That's the false security sense. You get it wet and you think you're okay, but then you don't look at it and it dries out. And
any problems going the other direction, like if you're in South Florida or something like that, or where Mitch lives in Louisiana-Texas border?
Yeah, I have a dehumidifier in my shop. I do. There's days that it'll be halfway filled just with moisture in the air. So, but I aim for the same numbers that Mark was saying, the 40 to 50 range, but dehumidifier.
Instruments can acclimate to low humidity, but it's rapid changes that cause breakage, cracks, seams to pop open. It's also important that luthiers glue tops on with very weak glue, because that's your safety valve. You would rather have a popped seam than have your instrument crack.
Very broad question, but this is from Dan Carson, who's the new assistant principal bass in the Lyric Opera in Chicago, and he just asks, what makes a great bass? And again, broad. Quality of materials, setup, age of wood. Yes. Okay. Just in general, what makes a great bass?
A great bass player.
A great bass player. Whoa.
I've noticed that, people always want to see great quality woods on basses, amazing flame and perfect spruce. And, if you look at really old instruments, I've seen some instruments in the local orchestra that I'm in, or not that I'm in, local orchestra in LA, the LA Phil, there are some amazing instruments with knots the size of my fist, or 3-piece tops, 4-piece tops that nobody would ever pass up on just because it's a 4-piece top. I think the luthier, the maker, has a lot to do with knowing how to make that instrument, knowing his materials and knowing how to make it work. So really, it's the luthier, that's trusting your luthier and knowing.
I got a few questions from people about carbon fiber sound posts. John Beal, and then someone whose name I forgot to write down, but experiences, are you using them? What are the tonal differences? Why might you use them or not use them? David Gage. Here he comes.
I've had experience with David Gage here. I've had experience with the Anima Nova sound post, and very good experience with them. I've had various players try them, I've installed them, and I've found them be not only a great diagnostic tool, but also work in the field really well. People who have tried them have generally come back and bought a second one. We've learned a lot already. I've learned a lot already. I think Arnold's learned a lot already from them. And one of the things I've learned is that the location is important, but maybe not as important as we thought. Maybe perhaps the amount of pressure the sound post is exerting at the top is more important. You have instances where you have just increased the pressure slightly, and the E strings just come right out, blossomed literally, and everyone heard it. When you're trying out the Anima Nova, the better the player, the more effect it's going to have. And getting back to what it takes to make a good instrument, all I know, I saw Ray Brown came in my shop, and every bass he played sounded a lot like Ray Brown. But the Anima Nova is very, very interesting. It's very fine-tuned. It's really well thought out. And I don't think it's necessarily the carbon fiber that makes it great. I think it's more the adaptability as to the instrument. There's a lot of future there. And also, the other important thing is you're putting in a new sound post. There's always the danger of when you're putting a new sound post in that is going to be a larger post, say going to summer post. You're pretty much guesstimating right away when you first put it in. You can't fit it immediately the first time. So by definition, the post is going to be a little too long because you need that extra length to make the fit. That puts us up against the wall of perhaps doing some damage. There's some tricks I do to avoid that, which is to prop it up underneath the bridge foot. But on the other hand, with this Anima Nova and any adjustable sound post like that, I'm not advertising Anima Nova, but you can actually, without any effective scraping on the top or any kind of damage or even threat of damage, because it's very fine. You have to really crank it to do any. You can just place it in there and put it up in the spot and put it up in the spot. It's very, very gentle to the instrument, which is great because how many of us have seen sound post damaged tops? I mean, it's terrible to repair those.
How is a top damaged by a sound post sometimes? It's too tight? Is it a top crack?
Either way, people kick it. I've seen people move sound posts in full tension. They used to, again, we won't name any names, but good teachers who would take the students' basses and whack the sound post during a lesson. And so the sound post it's a post. And the end grain there is very strong, and it's not going to chip out. So it gets damaged either by people who don't know what they're doing, or people who have good intentions and they just are trying to fit it in there, and the wood's soft. It's easy to do, easy to damage it. You have to be careful. To not damage it, and that's what we are. We're careful.
And when fitting a post, Jay here, when fitting a post, the luthiers are careful to, when you fit the top, you don't leave it really sharp edges. You just take the slight bit of sandpaper and just cut those edges a little bit. Call it a micro chamfer is what it's often called, but otherwise you can just pretty well scrape that up or chip off pieces off the sound post as well.
A lot of you working in climates like New York or Chicago or other places where I know back when I lived in Chicago, I had a winter post and a summer post. Talk to me about that. Do you use that? Is that very common or just on a case-by-case basis? When do you switch them out? How does the player know it's time to switch it out? Just talk about winter and summer posts if that's part of your experience.
I don't want to say too much, but definitely Chicago and New York are the same. Chicago, like Nick Lloyd will say, he has a New York City base now because he makes it differently for people who buy it in New York City because things do have a lot of stress put on them. And I was going to say, but going back to the humidifier and all that, Arnold's absolutely right. It's a change of humidity, but it's a rapid change of humidity. People don't keep their bases in their apartments all the time. They travel all over the place. So having a humidifier in your apartment is only minimal too. So, but if you really humidify a lot and then go to the Siberia, it'll crack because you don't want to humidify too much either in the wintertime. You want to be careful not to over humidify. But you definitely need 2 sound posts, generally speaking, and it's on the player.
Especially on a flatback.
Exactly. Flatbacks more so. They become concave and push up. But it's also some bases don't, and some players have had the same sound post that have not moved it for 20 years, and they're great players and had great careers, and I'm down with that. That's for sure. But so and sound posts are in a whole nother book, a whole nother there's a whole you can go to the psychology, acoustics. But I'm not going there. But at any rate, it's definitely something that needs to be done, especially in the weather changes like New York or Chicago or Montreal.
Joey here. All I want to say is if you're deciding whether you yourself need a different sound post for the seasons, one indicator might be that if you're noticing your string action changing with the seasons, that might be a good tell that your instrument's moving enough to necessitate a different sound post, but not a guarantee.
Ralph here. About 2 years ago, I moved from LA, where the weather is pretty consistent, almost year round. There's very, very little swing. I moved to Cleveland. I moved my shop there, and I had a crash course of sound, having 2 sound posts. Never really had to deal with it until I got there. So pretty much what I felt was if you're having to either turn on your air conditioner or your heater, it's probably time to get your bass checked out. If you're feeling the seasonal change, your bass is probably feeling it too. So, just a quick trip to your luthier just to check your instrument is a lot less costly than a sound post repair.
Kind of just to piggyback on that, out in Colorado, because it's so dry out there, I usually recommend our customers to get their bases checked up once before winter and once after winter when the seasons are going to change the most. It's at the very least, get your bass checked up twice a year is just a good practice to have.
I think I know the answer to this question, but I will ask anyway. From Alden Cohen, another Bay Area bassist, what type of glue is best to seal an open seam? Gorilla Glue from Andy Hassel. We'll cut that one. What do you really know?
Hot high glue.
Period. Done. The answer I thought. Okay, good. Moving on. A very short question with a very probably big on a big topic. Brian Crane asks, buying a bass, old versus new? New. Say the Luthiers. All right.
Joey here again. When you're buying an old bass, not only are you buying that bass, but you're also buying all the repair work that bass has inside of it that you probably don't know about yet. So just keep that in mind. You might be surprised in an unpleasant sort of way if you buy an old bass. New bass should have a clean slate.
Gabriel, I'm just going to piggyback on that and just to say I'm all for supporting new making because I think it's amazing and people here are doing amazing things and I think the level is only elevating. And Strad was a new maker once too. But there are also the benefits you get with an older instrument are you get its character that it's already developed over decades and decades or centuries of use. So, but the price tag on those obviously will be usually significantly higher. So, Robbie, you have something to add?
Robbie McIntosh. I get a lot of high school kids coming in, and they often ask, should they get a new bass if they were renting up until that point. And I say, look for an old bass, because a bass that's a few years old, a bass that has survived a few winters in our climate is something of great value. With a new bass, you don't know that it's going to survive.
Something that comes up a lot when I talk to people in education or any aspect of the bass world is how radically transformed the bass is, and probably many of you might agree. Maybe for the people who've been in this business for a while, or people who are newer to it, talk about what things were like 30 years ago versus 20 years ago versus right now, just in terms of the state of bass making. Another big topic, but I think it could be interesting to hear people's perspectives.
At the risk of sounding self-serving, I think we're in the heyday of bass making of all time. Seriously, because there's never been such a dissemination of information. There's never been anything like the VSA Oberlin Bass Workshop. There's never been so many people that are hell-bent on creating the best bass that they can. Unfortunately, we're also at a stage where we don't have all the great old growth wood, so we have to make up for that in other ways. But I think we're in a heyday right now, personally.
We were asked, the question was how it's changed in 30 years. It is greatly, I mean, tremendously, in every way. The players have gotten so much better, and that's dictated a lot of things. I look at it that way. The players have gotten so much better, and they're asking more out of the instrument, and people are delivering more. And I think that's one key thing that's happening. I think that just your strings are better strings now. The old in the 60s, you had really terrible strings. People were using metal strings because they're so tired of gut strings. You talk to anybody who played gut strings, Red Mitchell, Ray Brown, those guys, nobody wanted to play gut strings after they got back to metal strings, even though the metal strings are pretty new and pretty crude in some ways, compared to what it has now. Now they have the new plastic core strings, which are, which is fantastic. So all the innovations you got, these guys are making these C extensions now that are just unto themselves a work of art. And it used to be functionality was it. And now it's functionality plus style plus grace and artistry as far as that piece goes, more sculptural, which speaks to it. So, that's all changed greatly. And the soul of the music was the same then as it is now. Nothing that hasn't changed. So the essence hasn't changed. The great playing back then but there's so many great players back now. But back then there were great players too. But it's a different kind of playing. It's really different.
One thing I'd like to add is that in the last, I'd say, 2 decades, we've had a surge of acceptance of new basses. Whereas when I was growing up as a bass player, new basses were junk. They sounded green, they were terrible, but now there's a great acceptance of new makers, and that's really a great thing.
And the players are again calling for that. It turns out that since the playing styles are changing over time, I mean, if you think back, Bottesini, Dragonetti, Kusevitsky, and then Gary Carr, but now past that, I mean, you look at how many spectacular players there are, and they need basses who are set up to be able to play at their level that they can play. And I think that has a big impact on what we do, and they need instruments. Now, there are certainly situations where an orchestra may demand it's got to be an old bass, and they're looking at the look, they're looking for the sound, but even there are cases where the players have just said, well, listen to this, and they can make their case.
Thanks so much for letting me crash this event and chat. And I know people are going to eat this up. One of the things that people ask me for more and more of is hearing from luthiers. To hear from all of you is fantastic. And I never have any scripted questions, although I guess I kind of did today with these here. But I usually ask some sort of advice you might give your younger self, or someone who's 18, 20, 25 right now, thinking about, excited about the idea of doing something like what you're doing. What advice might you have to offer them? Or go back in time and give yourself a little bit of advice. Open it up to the crowd.
This is Mitch. I would give myself advice saying that this is actually a career, that this is something that people do. I never really thought that there were, I didn't really even know there were luthiers. I played a terrible bass in high school. And that's kind of how I got into it. I just did some work on my instrument, and I had no idea that there were people that did this full time. So I just tell myself, you don't have to wait until you're 30 or, mid-20s to do this. You can you can go into it instead of college.
Bring back shop classes.
To a young musician, practice. Make sure you just go to the shed and keep practicing, like everyone here is doing. And going back to what these guys are saying, bring your instrument in to a good luthier and trust them and trust them. Bring it in so people can really look at it as the seasons change. And I've seen people come in with instruments they've been suffering for years. And you go, what have you been doing? He's been, it was like bass hasn't played for, you bring it in, do a few changes, it's great. And then it's important to keep these things maintained.
Somebody asked me, that was a question I somehow skipped, but somebody asked me they said, if I think of it like getting an oil change on a car, is there a regular interval at which I should bring in a bass? Twice a year. Okay, I see nods all around the table. Okay, good. I need to get to the Luthier more. I guess one more question. Will someone please move to the Bay Area now that Gael McKeon has moved to... rent's only $12,000 for a 500 square foot place, so that's it. Yeah, I know a guy, so...
Personally, I remember basses before customers, so chances are, like, if I see a bass out being played or it's been sold to someone else, I'll remember it. The history, what repairs I've done, more than I know the person. So chances are your luthier remembers your instrument very well. What repairs has been done, and they recognize their work. So, they know your instrument's history maybe a little bit better than you can. So just take it in as often as you can.
Well, I know you've got a room filled with projects, so I'm honored you take the time to chat, and I'll link. I've got everybody's name on record, so I'll make sure to link up to everybody's site, shop, what have you. So, it's great.
We appreciate what you do.
Hey. What a cool idea to do this chat. I really hope you enjoyed it. And we have links to everybody that we were talking with, or I think I've got links to everybody, in the show notes for this episode. You can access those at our website, contrabassconversations.com. And I learned so much spending time at the VSA bass workshop. And again, like I said, hopefully the first of many. I know that people love hearing from luthiers. They're interesting people. They're the people that make it possible for us to play our instruments. And what great advice, right? Isn't that? Think of it like taking in a car. So twice a year is what they recommend. And I'm so glad that I got to that topic at the very end. Thanks again also to everybody who wrote in questions. And I know we didn't get to everybody's questions, but I tried as much as I could. I've got them in Evernote for the next time I do something like this. And if you would like to ask a question of luthiers for a future event or any topic that you like explored, let me know. And the way to get in touch is feedback@contrabassconversations.com. I'll happily take any suggestions for topics or guests, that sort of thing. And that's how this show is shaped. It's a community show. I'm talking, the one hosting, I guess, but I really want to think of this as something for the greater bass community. And I want to know what that greater bass community wants to hear about. And a lot of you wanted to hear about what we talked about today. Contrabass Conversations is produced by Michael Cooper, Steve Hinchy, Trevor Jones, and Mitch Moehring. Thank you, Mitch, for the great idea for doing this. And if you're looking for a bass, Mitch is located just east of Dallas. And wow, he's making great basses. I was just checking out one of the basses he was making at the VSA workshop. MitchMoehring.com will get you in touch with him. I'm your host, Jason Heath, coming to you sometimes from Oberlin, but mostly from San Francisco, California. And we will see you again soon for more life on the low end of the spectrum.